What's up? There we go. What's up, Bitcoiners? We got a lot of folks here this morning. Pardon me for being a little bit late. It happens. We had a little slowdown on the old coffee production line, and a few things just weren't going my way. I added that publishing of a poem this morning, if you didn't notice. Sometimes they're good, the ones I get out of Chat GPT. So I shared it with you today. There you go. Hello, my name is. Good morning. Accelerate. We're going to accelerate so hard today. I'm putting the foot down, pedal to the metal, super acceleration. Today's an accelerating day, right? Bon matin à tous. Good morning, everyone. Where do I sat? Hope you're doing well. Hassan, good morning indeed. Indeed. We got a lot of other good mornings here. We're going to skip a few, but we love the Assalamu alaikum and Ed Mubarak. I didn't know that. Still can't get over Talib's at least fiat is transparent and influenced, unlike Bitcoin. Talk probably owns a ton of BTC. No, I think he might actually have a broken brain, so I don't think he is into the Bitcoin thing. That's just my reading, but a lot of ego there, right? A lot of ego. Oh, we got a UTXO. He obliterated the like button. Let's go. So I challenge you to see if it still works on your end. Everyone else, trying to hit that like button and see if it still works. Morning, bud. Morning, Bitcoiners. We got someone anticipating the Moscow time. It is coming. It's not a thick Moscow time today, but it's a good one. High quality Moscow time. He owns a ton of BSV, P-Man Van says. He's a big bag holder waiting for Craig Wright's wisdom, right? Fake Toshi's wisdom. He needs it. ECS, Emerald City Syndrome. It's pernicious. We like it, Bitcoin Graffiti. We like it. Gary, hello from Scotland. Probably heard about all my Scottish Enlightenment content from a week ago. So I hope you heard that, and I hope you liked it, because it's true. Scotland formed the modern world. People don't realize that. So I know what you're, well, let's just acknowledge for a bit. I have a bit of sunspots coming in. I can see them reflecting against my chair. Kind of a, not a bad day, a little cloudy, but nicer than yesterday. So we got a sun up, Bitcoin running smooth. All that's left for us to do is have a coffee and talk about what's new. That's an okay coffee. I didn't brew that one myself. Wife helped me this morning because we were running a little late, and she warned me that it was a little too milky. So we'll see. It was all right. So, ready. Moscow time. This one's strong. You're going to love this one, guys. It's from the Associated Press. Breaking, right? I feel like almost all breaking news is all, there's all these stories on either end. Breaking, but we already knew about it like 2 weeks ago. Breaking, lab leak. Right? What? Didn't we talk about this a long time ago? This is in that same vein, but I don't know how breaking it really is. So the Associated Press, breaking. Jeffrey Epstein's suicide was the result of negligence and misconduct by federal jail guards, a Justice Department watchdog details in a new report. You got to read it, guys. You got to read what happened to Epstein, right? His suicide was a result of negligence. It was definitely them, right? It was definitely the negligence of the guards. So thank you, Associated Press. We needed clarification, right? So important. We all believe you. It's great. It's no problem. Yeah, definitely the guards' fault, of course. Idiots. Negligence. They were just sitting there like, it was like, oh, who's the criminal? Who are we guarding again? Oh, yeah, isn't he that guy? And he did some, like, he had some money and, are you going to watch him? No, you watch him. No, I'm going to go play video. I'm going to take a nap, right? That's what it was. That's what they're going with. That's the story, right? This one's great as well. This is from CNBC. Bitcoin is up 12% this month. Even though barely anybody is trading it, it's so full of losers. They're not even trading it, even though the price is going up, and they're like not trading it. Come on, losers. So that's what we got today. Now, where's my mouse? Now, Well, there's one more Moscow time, and it's not exactly Moscow time, but it bleeds into my story. So this is like a mixed Moscow time, right? It's not exactly Moscow time, but it mixed into the first story I have today. This is from Reuters Politics, which I just found, by the way. Reuters Politics. I knew there was always Reuters, right? You got the wire services, so you got Reuters, Associated Press. So Reuters, owned by Canadians, as I understand, right? The richest family in Canada owns Reuters, and so they have a special sub account for tweeting, which I'm going to start mining for Moscow time. I believe this is going to be my greatest source of Moscow time, and ought to replace some of the other ones that haven't been so Moscow timey lately. So this is it, and it's not really a Moscow time. So let me just say it. I'm teeing up Reuters Politics because I'm going to get Moscow time from them, but this is their headline: that the U.S. should apologize to Guantanamo Bay inmates for treatment, UN expert says. So I don't know about the whole story, but Guantanamo Bay is definitely an interesting context here. So if you guys don't know what Guantanamo Bay is, it is a part of the island of Cuba that the American military maintains control of so that they can run extraterritorial interrogations, right? So it was used to torture people, and it's been in American possession ever since the Cuban Revolution. They never got rid of it. It was a naval base. Of course, pre-Cuban Revolution, Cuba was more or less like an off-the-books U.S. state, right? It was Vegas before there was Vegas, right? Vegas only existed because Cuba was shut down. That's why Vegas's history doesn't go back before the Castro times. Vegas was invented by the mob because they lost access to Cuba because of the revolution. Now we've been to Cuba many, many times in my life, right? So I have a lot of experience there. I've sort of traveled all around the island. Well, not every part, but I've been around a lot, and spent quite a bit of time in Havana. Multiple times I've probably been like 5 times or something like that. So pretty good sense of what it's like there. And Canadians don't have any travel restrictions to Cuba, by the way. And in fact, there's sort of a highway in flights and convenience for Canadians to go there, because maybe there's some family relations, some people say, right? But the truth is, Justin Trudeau's dad was in fact really good friends with Fidel Castro. Castro came to the father's funeral, right? The first time Justin Trudeau really made a presence in Canada was at his father's funeral. He gave a speech, and everyone said, "Oh, he speaks so well. He's going to be the prime minister one day." And of course, Castro was there. Castro is the godfather, I think, to one of his brothers, or maybe the one, he did have, unfortunately for Trudeau, this is an actual sad story. There were 3 boys. The Kyle Kemper fella, who everyone knows in Bitcoin, who's a big proponent of the RFK campaign, by the way. And I've known Justin Trudeau's half brother for many years. Big Bitcoiner. Kyle Kemper is his name. Very anti-Trudeau government. He prays for his brother every day. Fine character, tremendous fella. Big fan of his. And so he's from the mother, though, he's a half brother from the mother, not from the father. So the father, who was prime minister, had 3 sons. One of them unfortunately passed away in a ski accident, and very sad story. And so that brother, I think it was him or the other one. So there's 3 brothers. One of the 2, Castro's actually the godfather for real, like no word of a lie. So all these rumors about Fidel being Justin's dad, they're fun. Who knows how true it is, but there's some strange family ties there. So all that to say, Canada has never been shut out of Cuba the way Americans were. We were always allowed to travel there. And as a result, it's a major hub for Canadian tourism. So lots of Canadians go. There's like a closed peninsula on the island called Veradero, where Canadians flood it. You get tons of Canadians there. But it turns out it's not just Canadians spending time there, right? It turns out there's a whole bunch of other people going there now. And it looks like Shoigu, so the general in the Russian army, who was supposed to have been fired after the Prigozhin-Wagner uprising, right? He was supposed to be gone. Well, he's not gone. He went to Cuba and he's met with the defense minister to talk about military cooperation. And this comes on the heels of China opening a permanent house for military troops for cooperation and all that. Now, remember that a lot of people are sort of comparing Ukraine. What would you do if you had these folks on your border with America? So it is happening, right? So how would Americans feel? A lot of people have said, especially on the right, like how would Americans feel if you had the same situation that Russia's dealing with Ukraine, with NATO coming to the border and arming and bringing missiles and all that stuff? How would Americans feel if they're in Mexico, or what happened during the Cuban Missile Crisis? It looks like we're starting to get something very similar. We're not hearing a ton of reaction to it, right? It looks like it's just happening, and that's fine. But another interesting thing was brought up today in relation to Cuba. So it's not just that the Russians are going there, the Chinese are already there. Here's a really interesting thing that has come to light. I'm not sure when it came to light, but it's making the rounds today and yesterday. And I get this from Ashley St. Clair. And what it is about some information about Cuba and what these three-letter agencies in America plan to do with it back in the 1960s. Now, remember, the moment where JFK realizes, and we've heard about this from RFK for a long time now, right? RFK's been talking about the JFK, what happened to his uncle, the assassination, what happened to his dad, which we're going to talk about later, right? We've got more details after his interview recently with Bill Maher, which we referenced yesterday. So remember, John F. Kennedy figures out that the three-letter agencies are not on his side. Three-letter agencies, of course, are CIA, NSA, FBI, right? They're called the three-letter agencies as a colloquialism. So the three-letter agencies that were giving John F. Kennedy advice about Cuba were saying sort of the following things, right? Don't worry, there's going to be a popular uprising. Everyone's going to come. The minute we set foot on Cuba, everyone's going to join us, and we're going to have a revolution against Fidel Castro. It's going to be great. And he didn't really buy it, right? So they put these mercenaries down, and then they got just slaughtered in the Bay of Pigs thing. And then the security agency said, oh, our plan didn't work. There was supposed to be popular uprising. Never happened. Send in the planes, send in the Marines. You got to go save them. And Kennedy said, like, you lied. You said it was going to be easy. It's not. I'm not sending anybody. So these people died. And it was just a slaughter, right? So it became a embarrassing moment for President Kennedy. But Kennedy understood at the time that he was not getting good advice. He was getting lied to. And from that moment on, he was running a covert, antagonistic relationship with his own three-letter agencies, which, of course, ends in Dallas in November 1963, where it didn't work out in his favor, right? Didn't work out in his favor. His battle with the three-letter agencies failed. And so Ashley St. Clair brings up this document because it's a perfect proof of the mental jump that a lot of Americans have to make to get out of World War III. Bitcoiners are already there. We're going to talk about it more as we go on, about the difference between personal agency, the three-letter agency that comes from Bitcoin, versus three-letter agencies, and what really the contrast and crux of World War III is about. So up with this document, and what it is an old document that's been unclassified relating to American plans in Cuba in this era. And the crux of it is the following, right? So here's what she says. I'll read the note first. The terror campaign. So this is about a terror campaign that the three-letter agencies themselves are going to organize. This is what they say, right? The terror campaign could be pointed at Cuban refugees seeking haven in the United States. We could sink a boatload of Cubans en route to Florida, real or simulated. We could foster attempts on lives of Cuban refugees in the United States, even to the extent of wounding in instances to be widely publicized, exploding a few plastic bombs in carefully chosen spots, the arrest of Cuban agents, and the release of prepared documents substantiating Cuban involvement also would be helpful in projecting the idea of an irresponsible government. So here's what Ashley St. Clair says. The government wouldn't do that. The CIA's Operation Northwoods had plans for terror campaigns and bombings of U.S. civilian targets in Miami and Washington to instigate a war with Cuba. One part read, we could foster attempts on lives of Cuban refugees in the United States to be widely publicized. They even planned to release false evidence to implicate Cuba. So this whole context of the government wouldn't do that, right? How many people have had their eyes opened up to the government wouldn't do that since COVID, right? And we still haven't even plumbed the depths of what the government would do, right? This is just one example. I don't even think my imagination goes as far as what they would do, right? every day the line seems to go further and further and further. But this idea of these three-letter agencies and what they're capable of and how much lying they're capable of is just starting to be understood. And Tucker Carlson did his show last night, episode number 7. It's getting similar numbers as the previous episodes. This one is called Irony Alert: The War for Democracy Enables Dictatorship. So what he does here is he goes back and asks the simple question of why we're in Ukraine to begin with. Like, what are we doing there, right? And he had some really good examples. First, is it because of the Bidens have to pay back the oligarchs who paid for their beach house, right? Is that the reason? Or is it because of the flabby people like Victoria Nuland and their career ambitions? And he says, no. They've told us what it's about. It's been clear. It's been a war for democracy, right? The whole thing is about a war for democracy. So he goes through all of the instances at the beginning of the war when American politicians like Biden or Pelosi or all kinds of people on the floor, Republicans, Democrats, all kinds of people, right, saying the war in Ukraine is the war for democracy. We can't have democracy at home unless we have democracy in Ukraine. If they can't vote in Kiev, you can't vote in Kansas City, right? And so Tucker is sort of making this case. And the case he ends up making, just a second. So Tucker comes in and does this contrast between the war for democracy in Ukraine and whether or not we even have democracy in America anymore. So he's making the contrast that a few people have made, including RFK, which is really interesting, right? So in RFK the other day talked about the spiritual connection almost, right? He was talking about how if America projects war in places like Vietnam, it will actually imbibe that same feeling at home. If it projects war abroad, it will have it inside of its country. And indeed, he made the point that ever since America started this war in Vietnam, it has never had a moment of peace. And it's kind of true, right? Like all these soldiers America has been bringing back generation after generation, coming home with their PTSD, bringing the war home with them, more or less, right? Vietnam, of course, created a huge divide in American homes, in American towns about the war itself. It certainly was not, there was no consensus in American life about American involvement in the war. The lines have been divided for a long time between exactly what we see in Ukraine. If we don't get democracy in Vietnam, right, we will lose it at home. But in the end, we projected war in Vietnam and got war at home. So he was making this whole point about elections and democracy in Ukraine. But then he acknowledged that just the other day, right, 2 days ago, Zelensky canceled all elections. There's no more elections in Ukraine. So we're fighting for a war, right, in Ukraine for democracy, but they're not going to have democracy as it turns out, right? They're just going to keep going. Now, people can say, oh, it's wartime, we're going to have elections again later. And Zelensky even answered, when we win, we'll have elections again. But remember, America has conducted elections during wartime. Right? We just had an election during a pandemic. We just had an election. We've had elections many times during war. We had, America continued to do its elections in World War II. It ran an election during the Civil War, right? So there's a ton of precedent about having an election during a war, especially when the options for the local population would be to vote for the way the war goes forward. Now, I understand war comes to you. You don't always get a choice. I don't know if you can put involvement in the war from a Ukraine perspective on the ballot, right? Like, would the other side just say, well, we give up and capitulate? Maybe, but people should be able to at least choose, right? There's no reason why that can't necessarily happen. But this context of projection and the two sides not really just syncing up or at least inducing some form of hypocrisy or inconsistency or incongruence, right? This whole tension and irony as as Tucker mentioned, extends almost through all conversations right now. Look at the Hunter Biden case just for a second, right? So the new excuse that we went with that I mentioned the other day from that, Visser or whatever his name is, the guy who won an award at the White House press dinner for saying that, Biden has found his Catholic faith in office, and so he won a special award, right? He's the guy pushing the talking points that actually Hunter can't be responsible for anything because he was an addict. Remember the whole addict excuse, right? He's an addict, so because he's an addict, he can't be responsible. And this is for the WhatsApp screenshot, right? My dad is sitting right next to me. So the whole thing is he's an addict, so he can't be responsible for what he did during that time. But remember, he was also, and this is where the irony and the logical fallacies all start to become very apparent, right? Remember that when his excuse for making all of that money was that he was just independent. He was like how can a guy with no experience make money working for an energy company? Remember when Trump asked Zelensky about the perfect phone call, look into influence peddling with Burisma and the Bidens, and then I'll give you the money, right? A quid pro quo, as they called it. Remember, the whole conversation around then was, what are Hunter Biden's qualifications? Like, how can Hunter Biden ask for this much money, and we have no idea what his expertise is or why he's there? He's not an engineer, right? And so, oh no, he's great. It's not just because he's the son of the vice president and son of the president. No, he has his own skills. So now the argument is he was justified in making the money, but actually he's an addict. Do you understand how it doesn't make any sense? Do you see why it doesn't make sense, right? You can't be both. You can't be an addict who's not responsible, but also it's because of your skills that you were getting paid money. It doesn't work, right? And it's the same kind of idea of this ironic, weird situation where America projects war, they have war, right? America does one thing and ends up fighting against fighting a war for democracy, and then simultaneously can't really have it inside of itself, right? So this whole thing, and by the way, Tucker also brought up the red flag that I've been mentioning for a while, right? The red flag being, shouldn't someone who's like not really so popular according to all polls, and who has a lot of opposition against them and not really a successful, there's a lot of problems in America. Why isn't that person sort of campaigning? Like, isn't it a red flag that they're not even trying to campaign, right? So he brought that up in his show yesterday. Now we're starting to see, there's all kinds of questions now about Merrick Garland as well because of the Hunter Biden thing. Jonathan Turley breaking all that down, saying, if you guys don't follow Jonathan Turley, you got to. He's probably one of the best legal minds following all this stuff, right? So at Jonathan Turley. The New York Times just confirmed that Weiss was prevented from bringing charges against Hunter in California and New York. This is in contradiction to Garland's prior statements, right? So he's saying, why couldn't they do it? Like, I didn't know why they didn't. Garland stated, I don't know how it would be possible for anyone to block him from bringing a prosecution. I am not sure which is worse. Either Garland was clueless or contemptuous. If he did not know, it is a further indictment of the leadership of his department, right? So, but the way all of this stuff works, right? The technique of how do you create these ironic, contradictory situations? How do you fight for democracy in Ukraine, but they actually have no democracy, and we're lacking tons of instances of democracy in our own place, right? How do you get to that point? Well, we've seen it many times. It's the removing of context from the story, and that's exactly what happened with the Hunter Biden thing, right? Right when they go with this excuse that, oh, he's an addict, they removed the context that was relevant from just a few weeks ago. The whole point of the story a few weeks ago was that no, he's qualified, right? But now he's an addict. So he's qualified to get the money. It's not influence peddling, but now he's an addict and not responsible, right? So the same sort of story is being applied right now to the Trump case, right? So Trump with the document management thing, very difficult story to follow, right? The Mar-a-Lago thing, because it is simply as boring as you think. It's document management, right? Who had the document? When did they have the document? Who was in charge of the document? And now yesterday we had the audio leaked, right, where Trump is apparently got the papers saying this proves my case and da da da. So now everyone in the fake news going around saying, oh, look, Trump has admitted to his guilt, right? That's not what happened, right? The context has been stripped. The context is that the audio tape is about Trump trying to protect himself, right? By keeping the document and showing that the military industrial complex was basically drawing up an attack on Iran and framing Trump as the one who wanted the war, right? And Trump was saying, I don't want this war. I don't want the war, right? I do not want this war. And what he was doing was showing that his generals went against him and were plotting his own thing, that he was not, in fact, the commander in chief, that he was dealing with subversive elements that ignored his capacity as president. And that narrative goes back all the way to JFK, right? That is exactly the Cuba Bay of Pigs story. It's the same thing. So Trump says with the document, and people think that's why he kept it. That's why the Mar-a-Lago thing now got to where it is because he is literally saying the military industrial complex did not listen to me. This is a document proving they don't listen to me, and they're trying to frame me, right? So that's what Trump says. We don't know, but that's what he's saying, right? So again, this is one of those context removal things. When everyone's saying, oh, it's national security, right? Oh, Trump was threatening national security. Well, why was he threatening national security, right? Now, you can even see the media made no effort to put the transcript in print. You couldn't find it. Very difficult to get access to it. It was just people reporting. It was just people running past the detailed analysis. No context was given about Trump, where it is clear if you listen to it, he is basically saying, right, to me anyway, that's what I hear, that it's an insurance policy proving that all of these generals did not listen to him, operated on their own accord, and were trying to frame him to drag him into some war. Now, interestingly, not only is Trump the only president to not do any foreign wars during his presidency since JFK was in power. There was another little interesting tidbit that you won't hear at all in the news today. It looks like one of these media organizations looked into which presidents were this is sort of a side note, which presidents were descended from slave owners, right? So guess what? Even Obama, right? Had from the mom's side, slave owners. I bet from the dad's side, a lot of slavery in Africa, right? Africans also own slaves, by the way. But there's only one president, only one in American history who had no slave-owning parents. None. Of course, it's Trump, right? Scottish and Germans were not involved in the slave business because, they themselves were slaves. So there was no slave business going there. They were just slaves. Germans, regularly conscripted into slavery stuff over time. Of course, the German word for slave just means Slavic, which is the people east, because they were also slaves, right? Let's not forget the Ukrainians have been slaves for many, many years. So there's only one president. You're not going to hear that much in the news. It was sort of an unintended result of that poll. So here you get the same sort of idea, the context being removed, the conversation around the military industrial complex being removed. You can see the technique in its perfection yesterday with Roseanne Barr. Roseanne Barr? Does anyone know Roseanne? If you're not from America, she had one of the most popular TV shows in the history of America in the 1990s. It was just a working class family. John Goodman, very famous actor, was the husband in it. And it was just your typical 1990s American sitcom. I loved it. I watched it. Great show. It was kind of like a poor family, a poor blue-collar family that loved each other and did their best and had a nice time and all this kind of stuff. They relaunched the show, and it was hugely successful with Roseanne Barr at the helm. But then she made a comment about Susan Rice, calling her, something from Planet of the Apes or something. And of course, she got canceled because it was racist. And so since then, she's just been sort of ostracized and ignored by mainstream media. You don't go near her anymore until she does something else. So yesterday she's doing an interview with Theo Von, another comedian, but it's just sort of an interview. And she says, nobody died in the Holocaust. It should happen. 6 million Jews should die right now because they are the problems in the world, right? And now everyone's saying, is anyone surprised about Roseanne's anti-Semitism, right? But if you actually listen to any bit of time before or after her quote, you could see that they did the same thing. They removed the context. It was obviously sarcasm. Roseanne herself is Jewish, right? She was not arguing for Holocaust ever, right? So Theo Vaughn comes in and says, this Roseanne clip was sarcasm, folks. A clip taken out of a long sarcastic rant she had during our chat. Can we not recognize sarcasm anymore? The point is not to recognize the sarcasm. It's to indict someone like this and go nuts on them, right? She's been ignored entirely until this moment. And here it is again. But this is just the same technique. You just take the context out, you put a video on, and you'll run with it, right? What we've been saying here on this show in the morning with all of you is that never trust video, ever in 2023. If you are saying the words, I saw it on video, right? Stop. You didn't see anything. You were misled, right? All of these video clips are misleading. That is why they're clipped, right? Even if it affirms something you want to see, right? They're removing context, and without context, all of this stuff is just floating propaganda. So in this case, with Roseanne Barr, it's the same technique, right? It's the same technique. And if they can't do that, they'll do what they did to Robert Kennedy yesterday. So what did they do to Kennedy yesterday? Same idea, right? If they can't remove the context, if they can't change the narrative, they'll just pull it. So it happened again. Robert Kennedy. YouTube just pulled another of my videos with former New York Post political reporter Al Gwart. People made a big deal about Russia supposedly manipulating internet information to influence a presidential election. Shouldn't we be worried when giant tech corporations do the same? When industry and government are so closely linked, there is little difference between private and government censorship. Suppression of free speech is not suddenly okay when it is contracted out to the private corporations that control the public square. In the case of my interview with Al Gwart, YouTube probably acted on its own initiative. It has internalized the political wishes of the establishment to the point where it knows what to censor without being told. Very, very powerful way of putting it, right? They know what to do without even being told. It's something that we've expressed for a long time with Amazon owning Washington Post and all these. You don't need to tell. I noticed it firsthand. When I worked at CoinDesk, I noticed the failings of basically human minds and hearts, right? Now, this is not an indictment on any of these individuals, but what you saw were, and the reason I say this is because I was in charge of the firewall, let's say, between the business side of CoinDesk and the editorial side of CoinDesk. So I was put in charge of writing a policy, let's say, right, about how to maintain this distance. And the thing I struggled with was that everyone assumed all the time that Barry Silbert, who owned CoinDesk, affected editorial. But it wasn't true, right? It was just a perception. It was never true. He never told you do this or do that, or he never came in the office and said, I didn't like that story. We could write anything. There was no limit to what we could write. But what I saw was the following. I saw people mind reading, right? That was the problem I was trying to solve. Mind reading Barry Silbert to guess what he would want. And then you would see things proceed, right? Now, I did my best to stop it. It was mostly stopped. I think CoinDesk solidified its reputation after the SBF and FTX stories because, of course, the fire burned so hot that it burnt Barry, and that has given CoinDesk a lot of credibility because they were willing to do that. Now, I'm not trying to take responsibility for what happened. The policies that I wrote were, I think, effective, right? They at least put CoinDesk in a position to be able to do this. It was still up to the writers, and it was still up to the talent that's there, and all of those things. But the perception that he influenced CoinDesk was accepted by everyone in the world. And I would say in some ways justifiably, because there were people who were like, well, what would Barry think? They wouldn't say that out loud. You could just tell, right? Like you could tell people were spinning those wheels. So in my sense, the policy I tried to create had, ways around that I thought would work. They did okay. So the point is, though, that Kennedy here showing that there are other incentives besides getting yelled at about an article. Like Rupert Murdoch never needed to go tell people at Fox what to write and think. They automatically did it, right? And there is this mind reading aspect of it. So Kennedy gets suppressed, and all kinds of people sharing exactly what's going on these platforms. And it goes back to the same things we saw with Twitter. When the Twitter file started, we saw that James Baker, all these people who are so heavily involved in Russia collusion, Mueller report, moved over to Twitter and were suppressing information there. It was all the same people. So this comes from Name Redacted 247, and it is a list. So it's a little old. It comes from around Christmas time. So it comes from the 26th of December of this year. So right in the context of Twitter files and everything that's going on. And he says this: Google currently employs at least 165 people in high-ranking positions from the intelligence community. Google's trust and safety team is managed by 3 ex-CIA agents who control misinfo and hate speech. Here's the breakdown. There's 27 former employees of the CIA at YouTube, 52 former employees of the FBI, 30 from NSA, 30 from DHS, and something called ODNI, which I don't really know what it is, 6 other people. So he goes through here about all the people that were involved in this stuff. So, and they've all got, but he always puts in when they've got their pronouns in their bio. So of course, Nick Rossman, he, him, current Google senior manager, trust and safety, former CIA analyst for 5 years. He goes through all of these lists. It's not just him. There's a lot more. There's she, hers, he, hims. We're not against it, but it does give you a sense of their political leanings, right? And when you even look at this story that we were referencing earlier with Hunter Biden and what's going on with the whistleblowers from the IRS and all of this stuff, well, we see that the New York Times buried in the 21st paragraph that the independent source who confirmed the 2 IRS whistleblowers claim that David Weiss said he blocked charges against Hunter in California. So, basically New York Times, again, removing context, orienting things so that you don't see that these people are involved, right? These former national security people are involved. So, what I heard from Robert Kennedy when he's talking about, censorship and what's going on, he also, and that's why the podcast strategy is so important for him. So when he was on the podcast just a couple nights ago with Bill Maher, and great podcast. Again, remember I said yesterday, Bill Maher, absolutely, if you're not following any liberal people out there, he's the number one person you should follow from the liberal point of view. He is an honest person as far as I can tell, right? And I can disagree with him all day. I at least trust that he wants a better world, and I'm 99% aligned with what Bill Maher wants to see in the world. I probably disagree with him on 99% of the ways to get there, but I have the utmost respect for what he does and what his convictions are. So he is a reliable source, I hope, and we see someone who can actually learn on the job and do all these things. So he had RFK on the show, and they ended up talking about the murder of RFK's father. And I found out stuff I had never known before. So RFK Jr. gave his account of the whole thing, and it was super interesting. So first of all, he mentions that, he believed for most of his youth that, he knew there was some conspiracy around his uncle dying, but sort of bought the main story mostly. But it turns out that when he got a little older, his father, the people who were with his father's best friends, helping him on the campaign, those that were with him that day had a different impression of how his father, Robert F. Kennedy, was killed. So his father, Robert F. Kennedy, is killed immediately after he wins the California primary and says, "We're going to go see you in Chicago," and they're probably going to win. So they come out of a room, and the way RFK describes, so the people that are with him end up saying to RFK over the years, you got to come read what happened, right? So it turns out they have the coroner's report with them. And the coroner report for RFK Jr., turns out it's called the perfect coroner's report. That's its nickname. Because what the coroner does is doesn't want the mess that was made of JFK, right? So JFK, the autopsy was apparently a complete scam, right? Like tons of mistakes, and it caused a lot of confusion afterwards. So this coroner says, and I guess he's a famous coroner at the time, right? Says, I'm not going to let this happen again. So what he does is he flies immediately to LA, and he gets the chief coroners from all the departments of defense, military, Air Force, Navy, and they all come to observe his autopsy of RFK. And they find out a few things, right? And so RFK is invited by this person who is next to RFK Sr. RFK Jr. is invited to read the autopsy next to the person who was next to RFK when he was assassinated. And this person believes that Sirhan, the person who is supposedly responsible for the assassination, is innocent, right? So it turns out they read it, and this is what RFK discovers, that Sirhan. So first of all, RFK comes into a different route than was expected. He's brought through the kitchen, and waiting for him in the kitchen, so someone knows that he's coming to the kitchen, is Sirhan. Sirhan shoots 2 times, right? Bang, bang. Misses RFK, we know, because he gets the guy who invited RFK there does take a shot, takes one of the bullets, right? So he's aware of this. So that guy gets one of the 2 shots fired. The other one is missed, and they catch the bullet in some door or something like that. Then he's wrestled down, right? And he gets the rest of his 6 shots out. Now we know about this. So there's 8 shots in the chamber, right? So the 2 are gone. He gets 6 off, but he's being held. They hit other people or go in places, but they're all accounted for. We know every one of the bullets, right? But simultaneous to that, there is a CIA agent who hated John Kennedy, who is the person who pushed him into that alternate route. And it turns out that RFK was not shot in the front where Sirhan was. He was shot in the back, right? So he's shot upwards like this, and it looks like, and then shot in the back of the head. And the pictures show RFK with the guy's tie, because he pulls the clip-on tie off. And the person is photographed with the gun. The CIA guy is photographed with the gun, right? So witnesses saw it. They know it was there. The bullets were shot at the same time as Sirhan was shooting, so no one really accounted for those bullets. But the coroner says there's no way Sirhan did it. The shots were from behind. Sirhan was in front. Now they get into Sirhan. So RFK has actually gone to meet Sirhan and believes he's 100% innocent. These are the same old strategy of finding low IQ, sort of handicapped people like Lee Harvey Oswald, or we've seen it in Canada, right? When you say exactly what this Cuba thing, our government wouldn't do that. Well, there was a case in Canada, a very famous one, where they went after retarded Muslim people and tried to, like, there was 2 or 3 retarded, like, they're retarded. Their IQs are not 90, right? They shouldn't even be able to stand trial. They're so unintelligent. They were drafted, solicited, and convinced to blow up a train line, or at least plan a train bomb in Canada. The most amateur job you've ever seen, but the minute they were enticed into doing it, which we found out later by Canada's CIA called CSIS, that's how it went down, right? But these people did not have the IQ to do it. We saw the same thing with the kidnapping of the Michigan governor, right? Did you ever listen to the people who supposedly planned the kidnapping? These were, sort of your typical white rural MAGA people, also semi-retarded, like retarded, not smart, not capable of planning anything like this, and also not capable of deciphering whether or not they're being misled or antagonized into doing something bad, right? So this has been a blueprint for a while, where you get someone like Sirhan, who's not smart, right? He's not being invited on Jeopardy, right? This is not a genius. And they pump him up full of anger. Of course, RFK had just given a speech promoting Israel's security and blah, 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 because it was the 1 year after the 1967 Yom Kippur War. And this guy Sirhan was a radical and hated Israel and blah, the same old story that you can understand. But very easy to radicalize someone like Sirhan, right? Not hard. Like, and now, as I understand, Sirhan is not on board with any of that stuff. Does claim his innocence, does claim that he was set up. Now he admitted to it and all that. He might have thought he did it, right? I don't think Sirhan was 100% innocent, right? I think he did intend to kill Kennedy. I just don't think he did, and didn't understand that he was a part of a plot, of an actual conspiratorial intrigue plot. But that's what we see, right? So RFK, right? This whole concept of asking these difficult questions about our three-letter agencies in America is really what World War III is going to be all about. And it is all about. That's what we're seeing these days. That's what we're seeing right now. So in the case of RFK, it's kind of interesting. Already he's a three-letter name, right? With his, JFK, RFK. You got the junior on there, but everyone still calls him RFK. And then you get this contrast of Bitcoin being about personal agency, right? So it's the three-letter personal agency. And indeed, that's a little bit about what Kennedy was saying yesterday. So in the same day that he is censored, he comes and says, as president, I will make sure that your right to use and hold Bitcoin is inviolable. Bitcoin is not only a bulwark against totalitarianism and the manipulation of our money supply, it points the way towards a future in which government institutions are more transparent. So what he's actually saying there is that the sort of personal responsibility, personal agency that comes out of Bitcoin. So that's what he comes in and says, that personal agency, more or less the personal agency that flows from Bitcoin, is the only answer to the transparent needs that have arisen from the three-letter agencies and their suppression of almost all democracy. It's the same old argument of a war for democracy, right? Ends up destroying democracy, ironically, in your own area, in your own, mind. So Balaji makes the same prediction that I've been making for a long time here, and he quotes this statement that Kennedy made about Bitcoin yesterday, saying 2016 was the first Twitter election, 2024 is the first Bitcoin election. And I think that's what we're going to see, right? We're going to continue to see that, because it's not just the three-letter agencies like the CIA and FBI. It's about government transparency in general, right? And you can see it. The BIS, so the Central Bank of Central Banks, right? They released a report yesterday. Sam Callahan from Swan broke it down. He says, more astounding stuff from the annual BIS report. In the first 100 pages, the entire report is dedicated to explaining how fragile the current monetary system is due to excessive debt and loose central bank policies. The second section is titled Monetary and Fiscal Policy, Safeguarding Stability and Trust. It goes into detail about the risks of society losing trust in the state and central banks due to high inflation and increased financial instability caused by their fiscal and monetary policies. The next section is titled Blueprint for the Future Monetary System. It begins by stating that crypto is a flawed system that cannot take on the mantle of the future of money, right? No word about Bitcoin. Context removed again, right? It then goes on to say that crypto can't be the future of the money system because it lacks the trust provided by central banks. The collapse of crypto and the faltering progress of other tokenization projects underline a key lesson. The success of tokenization rests on the foundation of trust provided by central bank money and its capacity to knit together key elements of the financial system. This capacity derives from the central bank's role at the core of monetary system. Pure Moscow time. Pure Moscow time. So the BIS spends the first 100 pages of its report explaining how trust in central banks and governments is eroding due to their irresponsible policies, and then spends the next 30 pages explaining why these same institutions should be the ones in charge of a new unified ledger because of the trust they provide. Obviously, it's delusional. It's as stupid as saying we need war for democracy. It is as stupid as saying We need to, spy on the president to keep fascists out, right? It's the same argument. It's the same one repeated, repeated, repeated. Therefore, as far as I can tell, when we look at the candidacy of RFK and this idea, the weightlifting, the personal health, personal agency, and exactly what he said, the transparency that Bitcoin can provide for all institutions and government is really the fight we're engaged in here. And it really is about personal agency versus three-letter agency, and what are the results, right? So that's what we got. Now let me see what I got out of these quotes today. I didn't see a lot of them coming in. Mikey just acquired 12K coins. Nice. Yeah. All right, let's see what's going on here. Thank God that thank God it's officially a suicide. Yeah, I know. It's I was worried about it all, It's always, like I say, people need to watch more David. Yeah, David Icke's an interesting guy. I've been a David Icke like, I don't know, consumer since the 90s. Yeah, I like this quote: "Democracy cancels democracy." Yeah. And I guess we're talking about the Tucker thing here, is basically Afghanistan. Well, that's what a lot of people said, right? The Glenn Greenwalds of the world have been arguing that from Assange, right, that Afghanistan was really about money laundering, and when Trump shut it down, they needed a new venue. So that's not me saying it, right? That's Glenn Greenwald's point. It checks out to me, but I don't have the proof, right? Bob Builder says the best part was, and then he says, "We stand alongside Zelensky. I decide then there will be no elections." Yeah. I stand with Ukraine unless Russia wins the war, in which case I stand with Russia. I like, yeah. That's the addict argument. This is the old addict argument for Hunter Biden, right? No, guys. I was an addict. Doesn't count. It doesn't count. It's the werewolf defense, right? The full moon was out, guys. That's not me. I'm an addict. I'm an addict. I'm a Bitcoin addict. I lost my Bitcoin. Yeah. We had a lot of experience in the family business. Yeah. There you go. What is it? It was great meeting you in Toronto, Nolan. Thanks, Boomer the Broken Ruler. The conference still has me energized. Yeah, Bitcoin conference is a way of doing that. I love the energy of them. Winston Alexander, national security is you. Yeah, at this point, there's nothing wrong with that analogy at all. Provides a stable, functional infrastructure for social justice by individual. Yeah, that's more or less the personal agency argument I'm referring to. Is anyone really former? Yeah, it's true. So Daniel asks, is anyone really former CIA? I've seen people that were, and you would recognize their motivations as honest, let's say, but the skill set never goes away. The way of thinking never stops, right? You don't think of things as like, oh, I want to persuade that person. What's the argument? No, you still think in terms of, I want to persuade that person. What's the theater I can show them? What's the magic trick? How can I hypnotize them? That part never really ends, right? The human prompt engineer, like, how do you prompt engineer another human, and the actual ways to do it, not like, here's a bunch of facts and now agree with me. No, right? That piece never ends. So their motivations may end, their ability to be free thinkers and change the mission assignment, that can change. That is possible. They can be on the good side if you want to see the world that way. But that's it, right? Go get it, everyone. Lift, staff sacks, get on those objectives. Bang, bang. Yeah, I'm going to go lift after this. We love lifting. Yeah, there you go. That's what I mean, Daniel. It's the three-letter agency, right? It's three-letter agency versus three-letter agencies. Bitcoin, BTC is three-letter agency, right? So I thought that was a pretty interesting simulation wink for us today. Must say it's a little depressing that our systems and our countries are so corrupt. Yeah, but Bud, at the same time, this is what its death looks like. So I wouldn't say it's depressing in so much as it is we're deflating the old system. It's depressing for them. if you're sitting there saying, oh, I got this great university degree and I'm going to get a job in government and then I'm going to tack back into the private sector, that strategy is done. So only to those people is it really depressing, right? If your plan was to go to school, get a degree, go to government, get the credentials, go to private sector, get paid a shit ton, that battle plan is over. You need a new strategy, right? You got to stack sats. Your best bet is to honestly go work in a coffee shop and stack sats. You're going to do better, right? Don't do the credentialism thing, right? It always comes back to what my friend says. Everything has a price. Everything. Absolutely has a price. Everything. Yeah. Anything you want in life, there is a price. And if you're willing to pay it, you can get it, right? That's the difference that a lot of people say is that's the thing a lot of people say about ending some addictions. Ending addictions are hard, right? But you'll never do it unless you yourself wants to do it, and you'll only do it when you're willing to pay the price because it's hard, right? So it's a choice, a difficult one, but a choice. So there you go. BIS is the central bank of central banks. That's why it's all gibberish. Yeah, I will say the BIS, I've dealt with them before. I find them, so I've been the person they've interviewed for these reports, right? Like they don't really cite you, but they get a bunch of people together and they ask you a ton of questions. And so I did this for CoinDesk in the early days of BIS. BIS has actually a ton of honest researchers that like Bitcoin. There are a lot of just like eccentric academic types inside of BIS. It's not exactly what you think it is. Now, I don't have much visibility higher than the people writing reports. I used to work with that Mark Carney guy who was the biggest financial loser in the history of the world. And he ran the BIS. And I never trusted him and don't know what he's thinking and all that. But just to be honest, the people I've met at the BIS, the researchers over time, not Bitcoiners necessarily, not full of imagination, but not evil, right? They're not out there. They can question their own world. So the BS is a weird one, right? Very, very well. But it is, yeah, it's BS. Like, I mean, we don't need it, right? And these people they're hiring, like, they're not influential. The people writing these reports they're not sending us their best, right? The wolf is dangerous for the hen house, so the wolf should be in charge of the hen house. Yeah. Thank you, my man. Appreciate the content. Thanks, Invasion Wrestling. Appreciate it. What are your thoughts on BRC20s? I'm not anti. I'm more or less for innovation in Bitcoin as long as there's no risk. I don't know my way around the BRC20s too much, but I would not be against issuing one for the royalty coin for Satoshi winning murders. I haven't quite figured out the mechanics of the royalty payments, but I'm not against using a BRC20. That's for sure. But I was talking with the layer 2 folks yesterday for Bitcoin, and there's other ideas out there. So, we'll see. When Bitcoin Pizza Day shirts, I don't know. I don't have I think we sell them. I think we sell them on the Bitcoin Magazine site. Yeah, I mean, it'll be demand for Bitcoin. So that's how I think about it, right? That's just how I think about it. I think there will be a chance. Okay, we got, we should have, there you go. All right, so that's what I got today. That's what I got. Some crazy person on Twitch, but that's fine. All right, man. That's all I got for today, team. I hope you're doing great. And remember, it is really about 3-letter personal agency versus 3-letter agencies. I like the way that sounds. All right, team. Thanks for coming. See you tomorrow. get a different one up before I leave.